Why You Hate Having Visitors. Carl Jung's 6 Deep Truths About Your Soul. You hear the doorbell ring, your stomach drops. Someone texted they're in the neighborhood and wants to stop by. And suddenly you feel it, that wave of dread, that inexplicable exhaustion before they even walk through the door. You love these people, you really do. But right now, the thought of entertaining them feels like climbing a mountain. If you've ever felt guilty for not wanting visitors, if you've ever wondered why your home feels like a sanctuary you need to protect, if hosting drains you in ways you can't quite explain, this video will change everything you understand about yourself. Today we're diving into Carl Jung's revolutionary insights about the human psyche to uncover 6 deep truths about why you hate having visitors and what this reveals about your soul. I'm talking about concepts that go beyond simple introversion. These are archetypal patterns, shadow aspects, and psychological needs that most people never identify. But once you do, your entire relationship with yourself transforms. By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden mechanisms driving your need for solitude. You'll stop feeling guilty about protecting your space, and you'll learn how to honor your psychological boundaries without shame. So if you're ready to understand the deeper truth about who you really are, let's dive in. And hey, if you find this valuable, hit that subscribe button. We explore deep psychological truths on this channel that you won't find anywhere else. Let me start with a confession that might resonate with you. Last month, a close friend wanted to visit, someone I genuinely care about. But the moment they asked, I felt this instant resistance. Not annoyance, not anger, just heaviness. I found myself crafting elaborate excuses. Maybe another time. I'm not feeling well. Work is crazy right now. And then came the guilt. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal and enjoy having people over? We live in a culture that worships extroversion, that celebrates the open door policy, that tells us good people are always available, always welcoming, always eager for connection. But here's what nobody talks about. For some of us, having visitors isn't just tiring. It's a fundamental disruption of our psychic equilibrium. Carl Jung spent decades studying why human beings behave the way they do. And he discovered that our need for solitude isn't a personality flaw. It's not antisocial behavior. It's not something to fix. It's actually a profound psychological necessity tied to the deepest functions of consciousness itself. Jung understood that the human psyche requires certain conditions to maintain health. And for many people, their home represents something far more significant than just a physical space. It represents the alchemical vessel where transformation happens, where the unconscious can speak, where the authentic self can emerge from behind the masks we wear in public. When visitors enter this space, they're not just sitting on your couch. They're entering your psychological sanctuary. They're introducing external energy into an internal world. And this creates a conflict that most people never articulate but deeply feel. Over the next hour, we're going to explore 6 Jungian concepts that explain exactly why you feel this way, and more importantly, why it's not only okay, but essential to honor these feelings. These aren't surface-level tips. This is depth psychology. So stay with me because this is about to get profound. Truth 1, the introvert's psychic economy. Let's start with Jung's most famous contribution to psychology, the concepts of introversion and extroversion. Now, you've probably heard these terms thrown around casually. Oh, I'm an introvert. I need alone time. But Jung's original formulation goes so much deeper than that. In his 1921 work, Psychological Types, Jung described introversion and extroversion not as social preferences, but as fundamental orientations of psychic energy. Here's the key insight. For introverts, psychic energy flows inward. Consciousness is directed toward the internal world of thoughts, feelings, intuitions, and subjective experience. For extroverts, psychic energy flows outward toward objects, people, and the external environment. Now here's where it gets crucial. This isn't about shyness or social skills. Many introverts are excellent conversationalists. Many extroverts struggle in social situations. This is about where your consciousness naturally resides and what depletes versus replenishes your psychic energy. When you're an introvert and you have visitors, you're being asked to redirect your psychic energy outward for an extended period. You're asked to monitor the external environment constantly, read social cues and respond appropriately, maintain conversational energy, attend to others' needs and comfort, suppress your internal process to focus externally. This isn't just being social. This is a fundamental reorientation of your consciousness away from its natural resting state. Think of it this way. Imagine you're right-handed, but someone asks you to use only your left hand for 6 hours straight. You can do it, but it requires constant conscious effort. It's exhausting, and the moment they leave, you're switching back to your right hand with profound relief. That's what hosting feels like for many introverts. It's not that you can't do it. It's that it requires operating against your natural psychic orientation for the entire duration. But here's what most people don't understand. This energy isn't infinite. Jung understood that psychic energy operates according to principles similar to physical energy. You have a finite amount. When it's depleted, you cannot simply force more. You must rest and recharge. For introverts, recharging requires solitude, requires returning psychic energy to its natural inward flow, requires time when you're not performing, monitoring or attending to external stimuli. Your home is where this recharging happens. When visitors enter, they interrupt this essential psychological process. And if you haven't fully recharged from your last external engagement, work, errands, social obligations, having visitors, can feel like being asked to run a marathon when you're already exhausted. Now here's the shadow side that Jung would want us to acknowledge. Many people feel tremendous guilt about this need. They've internalized cultural messages that say, good people are always hospitable. If you really loved them, you'd want to see them. What's wrong with you that you can't handle basic socializing? This guilt is toxic. It represents a betrayal of your authentic, psychological needs in favor of a cultural expectation that doesn't account for the reality of how your consciousness functions. Jung would say this guilt is the persona, the social mask, attacking the authentic self for not conforming to collective expectations. And when you override your genuine needs repeatedly to satisfy this guilt, that's when psychological problems emerge. Depression, anxiety, resentment, a feeling of being disconnected from yourself. The first deep truth is this: your need to protect your space isn't antisocial. It's a fundamental requirement of your psychological health. Honoring your introversion isn't selfishness. It's self-preservation. And once you truly accept this, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the guilt begins to dissolve. You stop apologizing for who you are. You start creating boundaries that honor your authentic needs. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who you're supposed to be. Truth 2, the sanctuary of the self. The second truth takes us deeper into Jung's concept of the psychological container. Jung believed that transformation, real, psychological growth requires what he called a temenos. This is a Greek word meaning sacred, space, a protected boundary within which the alchemical work of the psyche can occur. Throughout his life, Jung maintained a retreat at Bollingen, Switzerland. This wasn't just a vacation home. It was his deliberate creation of a physical space where he could engage with his unconscious without interference from the external world. He built it with his own hands. No electricity, no modern conveniences. Just him, stone, and silence. He wrote, "At Bollingen, I am in the midst of my true life. I am most deeply myself." Notice that phrasing, most deeply myself. This reveals something profound about the relationship between space and self. For Jung, certain environments allow the authentic self to emerge, while others require the persona, the social mask, to dominate. When you're out in the world, you're necessarily playing roles: the professional, the friend, the family member, the customer, the citizen. These aren't false selves exactly. They're adaptations, necessary interfaces between your inner world and the external demands of society. But they're not the totality of who you are. Your home, your personal space is where you're supposed to be able to drop these roles, where you can exist without performance, where the unconscious can breathe and speak and reveal what's actually going on beneath the social surface. This is why having visitors feels like such an intrusion. You're not just tidying up physical space. You're having to reconstruct your persona. You're having to shift from authentic being back into social performance. Even with people you love, there's a level of curation that happens, a monitoring, a self-consciousness. Jung would say that when visitors enter your space, you lose access to the temenos. The sacred container is broken. The psychological vessel in which transformation occurs is compromised. Let me give you a specific example of what this means practically. Maybe you're processing something difficult, a work situation, a relationship tension, an existential question about your life direction. These processes happen largely in the unconscious. They require time, space, and the freedom to let thoughts and feelings percolate without having to explain or justify them. When you're alone in your space, this process can unfold naturally. Images arise, dreams come, intuitions surface. You might suddenly understand something that's been puzzling you for months. But when visitors are present, you have to redirect all that psychic energy outward. The internal process stops. The connection to your unconscious is severed, and whatever was trying to emerge goes back underground. For some people, this is merely inconvenient. But for others, particularly those engaged in creative work, psychological healing, or spiritual development, this interruption can feel genuinely devastating. It's not that you don't like your visitors. It's that their presence prevents you from accessing the deepest parts of yourself. Jung also understood that this need for sanctuary becomes more acute during certain life transitions. When you're going through major changes, career shifts, relationship endings, identity crises, illness, grief, the psyche requires more protected space to process and integrate these experiences. During these times, having visitors can feel almost unbearable, not because they've done anything wrong, but because you're in the middle of a psychological metamorphosis that requires solitude to complete. Ancient cultures understood this. They had vision quests, retreats, periods of seclusion built into the life cycle. Modern culture has largely abandoned these practices, replacing them with constant availability and perpetual connectivity. But the psychological need hasn't changed. Your soul still requires sanctuary. Your unconscious still needs protected space to do its work. When you feel that resistance to having visitors, your psyche might be telling you, I'm in the middle of something important. I need this space right now. I need this container to remain intact. The second deep truth is this. Your home is not just a physical location. It's a psychological vessel where your authentic self can emerge and transformation can occur. Protecting this space isn't hostility toward others. It's honoring the sacred work of becoming who you truly are. And sometimes that work requires being alone. Truth 3. The shadow side of hospitality. Now we arrive at one of Jung's most powerful concepts, the shadow. The shadow is everything about ourselves that we've rejected, repressed, or denied because it conflicts with our ego, ideal, the image of who we think we should be. Jung wrote, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. So let's talk about the shadow side of hospitality, the parts that nobody wants to admit. Our culture has a strong collective ideal around welcoming others, the good host, the open home, the generous spirit who always makes room for one more. These aren't bad values, but like all ideals, they cast a shadow. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Much of what we call hospitality is actually performance. It's ego-driven. It's about how we want to be seen rather than genuine connection. Think about what typically happens when you know visitors are coming. You clean obsessively. You hide certain things. You put out specific items that communicate particular messages about who you are. You plan conversation topics. You curate your environment and yourself to create a specific impression. This isn't hospitality. This is image management. And it's exhausting because you're essentially staging a performance of your life rather than living it. Jung would say that when we do this, we're not actually welcoming the other person. We're welcoming their perception of us. We're hosting their judgment, their evaluation, their witness. The shadow aspect is this. We often want to be seen as hospitable more than we actually want to host. We want the identity of being the friend with the welcoming home, more than we want the actual experience of having people in our space. And here's where it gets even deeper. Sometimes our resistance to visitors isn't about needing solitude. It's about not wanting to maintain the false self that hospitality requires. What if the real reason you dread visitors is that you're tired of pretending? Tired of performing the version of yourself that you think they expect? Tired of hiding the mess, both literal and metaphorical, that represents your actual life? This is shadow material. This is the part of you that wants to be seen as you actually are, not as you should be. But that's terrifying because it means dropping the persona entirely. Jung believed that authentic relationship requires showing our shadow to others. But most social interactions, especially casual hosting, don't allow for that level of vulnerability. So we maintain the performance. And the performance is what drains us. Now let's look at another shadow aspect, resentment. If you've ever felt secretly angry about having to host visitors, that's shadow material trying to surface. Maybe you resent the expectation that you should always be available, the imposition on your time and energy, the lack of reciprocity. Do they host you as often? The assumption that your space is communal rather than private, the fact that your no isn't respected without detailed justification. These feelings are valid, but because our ego ideal says, good people don't feel this way, we suppress them. We smile and say, of course, come over, while internally screaming. The suppressed resentment doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow, where it grows darker and more toxic. It might emerge as passive-aggressive behavior during the visit, unexplained exhaustion or illness before gatherings, increasing social anxiety, a general sense of being trapped in your own life. Jung's solution to shadow material isn't to act it out unconsciously. It's to bring it into consciousness and integrate it. This means acknowledging, I resent when people expect me to host. I feel imposed upon. I don't actually enjoy entertaining in my space. Once you admit these truths to yourself, you can address them consciously. You can set boundaries. You can say no without elaborate excuses. You can propose alternatives that honor everyone's needs. But as long as the resentment stays in shadow, it controls you. There's one more shadow aspect we need to explore. The fear of intimacy disguised as need for solitude. Sometimes people avoid visitors not because they need solitude for healthy psychological reasons, but because genuine connection terrifies them. Jung differentiated between healthy solitude, which is generative and restorative, and isolation, which is defensive and deadening. If your aversion to visitors comes from fear of being truly seen, shame about your life circumstances, deep mistrust of others, unhealed relational wounds, using I'm an introvert as armor against vulnerability, then the work isn't about honoring your boundaries. It's about healing the wounds that make connection feel threatening. This is difficult shadow work, and it requires honesty. Are you protecting sacred space, or are you hiding? Jung would say both can be true at the same time. You can genuinely need solitude and be afraid of intimacy. The goal isn't to pick one truth. It's to hold both and work with both. The third deep truth is this. Your feelings about visitors contain shadow material that reveals both your authentic needs and your unhealed wounds. The path forward requires radical honesty with yourself about what's really driving your resistance. Then you can honor what's healthy and heal what's wounded. Truth 4. The collective unconscious and inherited expectations. We need to talk about why this issue feels so loaded, why the guilt is so intense, and why you might feel like you're violating some unspoken rule when you don't want visitors. This takes us into Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which contains your individual repressed memories and experiences, the collective unconscious contains universal patterns and archetypal structures shared across humanity. These archetypes shape how we think, feel, and behave in ways we're rarely conscious of. One of these archetypal patterns is the hearth and hospitality. For thousands of years of human evolution, survival depended on community, the tribe, the clan, the village. Being expelled from the collective meant death, and maintaining connection with others often centered around the home, the fire, the shared meal. Hospitality wasn't just nice. It was sacred. Many ancient cultures had gods of hospitality. Violating the laws of welcoming strangers could bring divine punishment. The Greek concept of xenia, the Jewish tradition of Hachnasat Orkim, Islamic ziyafa, Hindu atithi devo bhava, the guest is God. These aren't just cultural preferences. They're deeply embedded archetypal expectations about what it means to be a good human being. And they're still operating in your psyche whether you're conscious of them or not. When you don't want visitors, you're not just violating a personal preference. You're bumping up against thousands of years of collective programming that says, the home is for gathering. Refusing hospitality is moral failure. This is why the guilt feels so disproportionate. It's not just about disappointing one person. It's about violating an archetypal expectation embedded in the collective unconscious. Jung would say that part of individuation, becoming your authentic self, requires differentiating from the collective, requires examining which collective values actually serve you and which ones demand your self-betrayal. But here's where this gets really interesting. The archetype of hospitality developed in a completely different context than the one we live in now. In traditional societies, homes were semi-public spaces where community life unfolded. Privacy was rare and not particularly valued. Identity was collective rather than individual. Visitors often meant survival, sharing resources, information, protection. Entertainment options were limited, so socializing was essential. In our current context, homes are private sanctuaries in an overwhelming public world. We have unprecedented access to privacy. The third deep truth is this. Your feelings about visitors contain shadow material that reveals both your authentic needs and your unhealed wounds. The path forward requires radical honesty with yourself about what's really driving your resistance. Then you can honor what's healthy and heal what's wounded. Truth 4. The collective unconscious and inherited expectations. We need to talk about why this issue feels so loaded, why the guilt is so intense, and why you might feel like you're violating some unspoken rule when you don't want visitors. This takes us into Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which contains your individual repressed memories and experiences, the collective unconscious contains universal patterns and archetypal structures shared across humanity. These archetypes shape how we think, feel, and behave in ways we're rarely conscious of. One of these archetypal patterns is the hearth and hospitality. For thousands of years of human evolution, survival depended on community. The tribe, the clan, the village. Being expelled from the collective meant death, and maintaining connection with others often centered around the home, the fire, the shared meal. Hospitality wasn't just nice, it was sacred. Many ancient cultures had gods of hospitality. Violating the laws of welcoming strangers could bring divine punishment. The Greek concept of xenia, the Jewish tradition of Hachnasat Orkim, Islamic ziyafa, Hindu atithi devo bhava, the guest is God. These aren't just cultural preferences. They're deeply embedded archetypal expectations about what it means to be a good human being. And they're still operating in your psyche whether you're conscious of them or not. When you don't want visitors, you're not just violating a personal preference. You're bumping up against thousands of years of collective programming that says, the home is for gathering. Refusing hospitality is moral failure. This is why the guilt feels so disproportionate. It's not just about disappointing one person. It's about violating an archetypal expectation embedded in the collective unconscious. Jung would say that part of individuation, becoming your authentic self, requires differentiating from the collective, requires examining which collective values actually serve you and which ones demand your self-betrayal. But here's where this gets really interesting. The archetype of hospitality developed in a completely different context than the one we live in now. In traditional societies, homes were semi-public spaces where community life unfolded. Privacy was rare and not particularly valued. Identity was collective rather than individual. Visitors often meant survival, sharing resources, information, protection. Entertainment options were limited, so socializing was essential. In our current context, homes are private sanctuaries in an overwhelming public world. We have unprecedented access to privacy. Identity is highly individualized. Visitors are chosen rather than necessary for survival. We have infinite entertainment and connection options. The archetypal pattern of hospitality hasn't evolved to match our radically different circumstances. So we're operating with ancient programming in a modern context, and the mismatch creates enormous psychological tension. You might be an introvert who recharges through solitude, works from home, and has rich inner life that doesn't require constant external stimulation. But the archetype says, open your door. Welcome others. The hearth is for gathering. This creates what Jung called a complex, a charged cluster of associations around a particular issue. Every time the topic of visitors comes up, the complex is activated, and you feel that disproportionate emotional response. There's another layer here too. Cultural and familial inheritance. Beyond the collective unconscious, we each carry specific family and cultural patterns around hospitality. Maybe you grew up in a culture where dropping by unannounced was normal and welcomed, where refusing to host was genuinely offensive, where the home was always open and food was always available. Or maybe you grew up in a family where your mother was the hostess with the mostess, where enormous effort went into entertaining, where your value was measured by your hospitality. These patterns become internalized. They form part of your personal unconscious. And when you don't want to replicate them, you might feel like you're betraying your family, your culture, your lineage. This is what Jung called the ancestral legacy, the psychological inheritance, passed down through generations that shapes your sense of obligation and identity. Breaking from this inheritance feels like breaking from your roots. And that's terrifying, even when it's necessary for your individuation. But here's what Jung would tell you. Honoring your ancestors doesn't mean replicating their patterns. It means continuing their deepest values in forms that fit your actual life. Maybe your grandmother's constant hosting was her expression of love and connection. You can honor that value through different means, meaningful one-on-one connections, thoughtful communication, showing up for people in ways that align with your energy. You don't have to entertain in your home to prove you care about people. The fourth deep truth is this. Your guilt about not wanting visitors is amplified by archetypal patterns and cultural inheritance that don't match your psychological reality. Individuation requires distinguishing between collective expectations and authentic personal needs. It requires saying, this pattern served my ancestors in their context, but it doesn't serve me in mine. And that's not betrayal. That's evolution. Truth. 5. The anima-animus conflict in social expectations. We're approaching some of Jung's more esoteric concepts now, but stay with me because this one is crucial. Jung believed that every person contains both masculine and feminine psychological principles, regardless of their biological sex or gender identity. He called the feminine principle in men the anima and the masculine principle in women the animus. But more broadly, these represent universal psychological energies that we all contain and must integrate. The feminine principle, anima, is associated with receptivity, nurturing, relationship, emotional connection, the inner life, being rather than doing. The masculine principle, animus, is associated with boundaries, structure, discrimination in the sense of discernment, assertion, direction, doing rather than being. Now here's how this relates to visitors. Hospitality has historically been coded as feminine energy, receptive, nurturing, relational, opening your space to others, attending to their needs, creating comfort. And boundary setting has been coded as masculine energy, establishing limits, saying no, protecting territory, discriminating who enters your space. In healthy psychological development, we need both energies in balance. We need the capacity to be open and the capacity to close, to welcome and to refuse, to give and to protect our resources. But cultural conditioning often pushes people toward one side, based on gender expectations. Women are often socialized to overdevelop their anima to be perpetually receptive, nurturing, available, hospitable, while suppressing their animus, their right to boundaries, to assert their needs, to say no without explanation. Men may be socialized to overdevelop their animus, to be boundaried, protected, unavailable, while suppressing their anima, their capacity for receptivity, vulnerability, and genuine welcoming. When you feel internal conflict about visitors, it might be because these energies are out of balance in your psyche. If you're someone socialized as a woman, you might feel intense guilt about not wanting to host, because you've been taught that being hospitable is essential to being a good person, a good woman, a good family member. Your underdeveloped animus, your capacity to establish boundaries, is fighting to emerge. But your overdeveloped anima keeps saying, but you should be welcoming. What will they think? You're being selfish. The work here is to strengthen your animus energy, to develop your capacity to say, no, this doesn't work for me. I need my space right now. I'm not available for hosting this month. Without guilt, without over-explanation, without softening it with apologies. If you're someone socialized as a man, the conflict might be different. Maybe you've been taught that having too many boundaries makes you cold, unavailable, incapable of relationship. That real connection means always opening your door. Your underdeveloped anima, your capacity for receptivity and flexibility might be fighting to emerge, but your overdeveloped animus keeps everything locked down. The work here is to strengthen your anima energy, to develop your capacity to be sometimes receptive, to allow controlled opening, to create genuine welcome when you choose to invite someone in. But here's the crucial insight that Jung would emphasize: both energies are valid. Both are necessary. The goal isn't to be always open or always closed. It's to develop conscious choice. Healthy psychological function means sometimes I welcome visitors, anima. Sometimes I protect my solitude, animus. Sometimes I'm receptive, anima. Sometimes I'm boundaried, animus. And I can consciously choose which energy is appropriate for this moment based on my genuine needs, rather than unconscious conditioning. The fifth deep truth is this: your conflict about visitors may reflect an imbalance between receptive and protective energies in your psyche. Integration means developing both capacities fully, so you can consciously choose when to open and when to close based on your authentic needs, rather than cultural conditioning. Truth 6. Individuation requires solitude. We've arrived at the deepest truth, the one that ties everything together. Jung's central concept, the organizing principle of his entire psychological system, is individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who your family wants you to be, not who society expects, not who you think you should be, but your authentic, whole, integrated self. Jung wrote, individuation means becoming a single, homogeneous being, and, insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. This is the central task of human development, and it cannot happen in constant company. Think about every significant transformation you've experienced, every major realization, every moment of profound self-understanding. They didn't happen at parties. They didn't happen while entertaining visitors. They happened in solitude, in silence, in the space between external stimulation when your psyche could finally speak to you. Individuation requires specific conditions. First, withdrawal from collective opinions. You can't discover who you really are while constantly absorbing others' projections of who you should be. You need distance from the collective to hear your own voice. Second, dialogue with the unconscious. Through dreams, active imagination, creative expression, and simple silence. You must learn to communicate with parts of yourself that operate below conscious awareness. This requires uninterrupted time and space. Third, integration of shadow material. You must face the parts of yourself you've rejected and denied. This uncomfortable work happens in private, in safety, with no one watching or judging. Fourth, development of authentic values. You must question inherited beliefs and collectively imposed values to discover what you genuinely believe, value, and stand for. This philosophical work requires sustained reflection. None of this can happen while hosting visitors. None of this can happen in constant company. Your need for solitude isn't antisocial. It's the prerequisite for becoming a real person. Jung understood that humans are herd animals. We're designed for connection and community. But he also understood that without periods of genuine solitude, we never transcend the herd mentality. We remain unconscious, participants in collective patterns rather than conscious individuals. The individual who is not anchored in God can offer no resistance on his own. Resources to the physical and moral blandishments of the world. By God, Jung meant the self with a capital S, the organizing center of the psyche, the totality of who you are. Connection to this self requires solitude, requires sanctuary, requires protected time when you're not performing for others. This is why monks retreat, why artists need studios, why writers need solitude, why spiritual seekers require withdrawal. Not because they hate people, but because the work of becoming whole requires conditions that constant socializing makes impossible. Your dread of having visitors might be your psyche's way of protecting your individuation process. It's saying, I'm in the middle of something crucial. I'm becoming who I actually am. I cannot afford to redirect this energy toward performance and social maintenance right now. And if you override this signal repeatedly, if you constantly sacrifice your solitude for others' expectations, you'll end up alienated from yourself, living someone else's life, playing a role in a story that isn't yours. Jung saw this as the central tragedy of modern life. People living unindividuated, unconscious, disconnected from their authentic selves because they never created the conditions for individuation to occur. But here's the paradox that Jung also emphasized. Individuation doesn't lead to isolation. It leads to more authentic connection. When you've done the work of becoming yourself, when you've integrated your shadow, balanced your energies, connected to your authentic values, you can show up in relationships as your real self rather than your persona. The connections become deeper, more meaningful, less exhausting, because you're not performing, you're being. But you can only get there through the solitary work first. The sixth and deepest truth is this. Your need to protect your solitude is actually your psyche protecting your process of becoming who you truly are. This isn't selfishness. This isn't antisocial behavior. This is the sacred work of individuation, and it requires periods of withdrawal from the collective. Honoring this need isn't turning away from others. It's the necessary condition for eventually being able to meet others as your authentic self. So where does this leave you practically? You've just absorbed 6 deep psychological truths about why you hate having visitors. Now what? First, stop apologizing for your authentic needs. Your need for solitude is legitimate. Your need to protect your space is valid. You don't need elaborate excuses or justifications. I'm not available for hosting right now is a complete sentence. Second, differentiate between guilty obligation and genuine desire. Before agreeing to have visitors, pause and ask, am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because I think I should? Honor the honest answer. Third, communicate your boundaries clearly and without shame. I love you, and I'm not able to host right now. I need this time for myself. Can we connect another way? This honors both the relationship and your needs. Fourth, create alternative forms of connection. If you care about people but don't want them in your space, suggest meeting in neutral locations, video calls, walks in nature, or other formats that don't invade your sanctuary. Fifth, recognize when you're hiding versus healing. Be honest with yourself. If your resistance to visitors is protecting your individuation, honor it. If it's defensive isolation from unhealed wounds, get support for that healing work. Sixth, honor the rhythm of solitude and connection. You don't have to be always available or always isolated. Find your natural rhythm. For many people, it's extended periods of solitude punctuated by intentional, meaningful connection. Jung lived this way. Extended periods at Bollingen in solitude, then returning to Zurich for his practice and relationships. He understood that both were necessary. The goal isn't to become a hermit. The goal is to become conscious about when you need withdrawal and when you need engagement. Finally, trust your psyche. That feeling of dread when someone wants to visit, it's not a character flaw. It's information. Your unconscious is speaking to you about your needs. Listen to it. Jung spent his entire career teaching people to trust the wisdom of their own psyches. Your feelings about visitors contain that wisdom. Stop dismissing them. Start honoring them. If you've made it this far, something in these ideas resonated with you. You recognized yourself in these patterns. You felt the relief of understanding why you feel the way you do. That recognition is the beginning of transformation. You're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're not a bad friend, family member, or person. You're someone whose psyche requires specific conditions to maintain health and continue the essential work of becoming who you truly are. Jung believed that the most revolutionary thing you can do in modern life is become yourself. Not the self everyone expects, not the self that's easier or more acceptable, but your authentic, whole, individuated self. And sometimes becoming that self requires closing your door, protecting your space, saying no to visitors so you can say yes to your own soul. This isn't selfishness. This is self-realization. And the world doesn't need more people performing hospitality while disconnected from themselves. The world needs more people who have done the deep work of individuation and can show up authentically in their relationships. So honor your need for solitude. Protect your sanctuary. Trust that the guilt will diminish as you become more connected to your authentic self. Your soul knows what it needs. Listen to it. If this video helped you understand yourself better, consider subscribing. We explore deep psychological truths that transform how you see yourself in your life. And if you want to go deeper, check out the video appearing on screen right now about share this with someone who needs to hear that their need for solitude is valid and sacred. Leave a comment below about which of these 6 truths resonated most with you. I read every comment, and your insights add to our collective understanding. Remember, your home is your temple. Your solitude is your sacred practice. Your boundaries are your protection. You don't owe anyone access to your sanctuary. I'll see you in the next video.